Welcome back. So we are going to do something a little different today. So I talked about the EPZ G10 maybe a week ago. And at the time that I ordered the G10, I had actually ordered the TP30. So they actually both arrived at the same time. I had spent time with both of these, but I did wanted to talk about the TP30. So what's actually a little special about the TP30 is, one, they call it the small yellow brick. And it is indeed a small gold brick, or maybe they call it a gold brick. Yellow brick or gold brick? I think it's a gold brick. But yes, it is a DAC headphone amplifier. And maybe if my camera stops focusing, we can actually see what that looks like. So EPZ TP30 ESS. And this one is the ESS 9038QT or Q2M. So nice ESS. Those of you who are ESS fans, this one is kind of right in line for you. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But, I mean, what's noticeable about this one is you do get a single-ended and balanced 4.4. It's actually very weighty. I think you first look at it and you're probably thinking it's made of aluminum and it's very lightweight. But no, it is actually very weighty. Nice clickable volume, so I can't really argue with that. But the rest of it, pretty standard fare for a dongle or a dual output dongle at least. So yeah, what's actually most noticeably when you hold it in your hand is actually how heavy it is. And I'm not sure there's anything too spectacular on the box. There's lots and lots of stats, which or specs that we'll go through right now as a matter of fact. So spec-wise, TP30 has single-ended outputs, and what's kind of interesting about that, 2 VRMSs, and that's about 125 milliwatts. Then on the balanced balanced gain switch, so it actually does have a high and a low. At least on the high, this one is 4 VRMs and 270 milliwatts. So the 4.4 is actually a pretty beefy output for dongles of this price. The rest of the specs are actually pretty reasonable, and we'll talk about the ones that are maybe not as reasonable in a second. But that net weight, 56 grams, do check that out. It's it's in your pocket. It's not one of those that disappears in your pocket and you forget about it. This one will remind you that it is in your pocket. So like I said, it is an ESS 9038Q2M DAC, plus it has dual amplifier chips, R2 6863s, which is, I guess, pretty impressive in how they get up to 270 milliwatts. Sound-wise, I will say it's kind of in line with ESS, and I would call it smooth, some warmth to it. I think it works best on bright sets. It kind of smooths, but it's not really rolled off. A little hard to describe how it's very controlled, but it doesn't really have the sparkles or the twinkles up there in the treble. It's just kind of a smooth right out into the end. But as far as what maybe a Cirrus chip does, where it's a little more sparkly at the end, it doesn't really do that. It's just kind of a smooth, even-tempered sound all the way out through treble, but it does sound neutral compared to some of those CS DACs like I was just talking about. Not really good or bad, it's just a more of a preference. And I'll say that a lot of what my experience with dongles is, it kind of goes back to where you started. And oddly enough, I actually started with Sabre DACs and an LG phone and their quad DAC. So that's sort of my ground reference of where things are more neutral, brighter, darker, duller. A lot of those things go back to your first experience with a different or a branded DAC like that. And mine was LG phone. So this one kind of feels right at home with me because this one, of course, is in ES as well. CSs always tended to sound a little bright to me, but pretend that you started with a CS or a Cirrus chip and then switch to this, you think, oh, it's just a little bit dull. So I do think a lot of people's recommendations and their preferences and their rankings, a lot of that is based on where they started or what their ground reference is. And is their ground reference the same neutral that you think it's a neutral, or is there starting it with a CS, which is a little brighter? Yeah, I think it's kind of a nightmare to figure out which dongles to buy. So I don't typically pay too much attention to dongle reviews. Oddly enough, as I'm doing one, I will say I don't pay attention to them. I don't ask people, hey, what dongle are you using? If I have an urge to buy one, I will buy one. If I'm talking to EPZ and I notice they have a new dongle, I'll say, hey, what's up with the new dongle? Can you give me $5 off? And that's about what I got on this one. So that is how I ended up with the TP30. So pro-wise, I think this one does do two reasonable outputs, 125 and 270, like I said. built like a tank. As I said, gold brick. I think that is very apropos for how it feels and how it's built. And you can manually switch the gain values. If you actually hold these guys in like this, it will switch to high gain or low gain. It will toggle the two, and this will actually change colors depending on if you're on high or low, and which decoding bit rate. So it actually has two sets of like full colors for depending on if it's high or low and which bit rate you are decoding. Driver can actually drive planar. So this is Michael Bruce's Glam Ring. So very cool green set. I thought it matched the green on the G10, so I saw it there. But yeah, oddly enough, I think this one is, even on single-ended, I think it actually does quite well on planars. And this one is actually quite hard to drive. I think even Michael will admit that Glam Ring was actually kind of up there as far as sensitivity, or load, or down there, I guess is how you would say it. But yeah, a little bit harder to drive. I had no problems with it, even on single-ended. No problems on G10, because that one is super easy to drive. But it doesn't really flatten the stage on planars, which is what I was most interested in. So no usability quirks, no bitrate weirdness, no volume weirdness. It didn't get stuck. I didn't have to press the volume up a million times. You can hold it down and it actually slides up in volume and down. So lots of usability things are all ironed out, and exclusive works on Windows. So all that stuff, no real usability things there. Con-wise, I think if you're an ESS hater, I guess probably not for you. And I think there are some of those. I think it's quite heavy for a dongle. I think, as I said, you kind of really notice it in your pocket. 32 ohms of output impedance. I do think, I'm not sure, it's somewhere over here. So they say it refers to the maximum thrust output after connecting 32 ohms headset. So 32 ohms output impedance is kind of a high number. So I'm not sure they meant that to be 32 ohms or they're referring to something else. But I do think that it's over 1. I think it's actually pretty up there. So I think that can be a con for some people, especially if you're used to hybrids or balanced armatures. It may affect your tonality. And again, like kind of finally the $65 price. That's kind of iffy for this type of dongle. I think there's lots of them at the same price. So it does make it a little harder to stand out. So that is what I got on TP30. So thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.